I want this to sink in for people. Ridley Scott is 87 years old. This man is 87 years old. He is 5 years older than President Joe Biden, and he is directing Gladiator II with a $300 million plus budget. And people are having the audacity to be snide about it and just be like, no, I'm not entertained. Like, what are we doing? Like, why are we kind of just like making fun of a director who's spending his golden years, 87, making Gladiator 2 for our entertainment and just being so snide and dismissive of it? I want to give this movie an actual review of honesty with it. And one sentence about this movie before we really get into this review. As the naval battles in the Colosseum take place with hundreds of extras, giant ships ramming into each other, arrows flying everywhere, and sharks eating people who fall into the water, I literally felt my chest vibrating. I briefly thought this is a better spectacle than 90% of the movies that I will see this past decade and this upcoming decade. There is a lot to celebrate about Gladiator 2, and I want to get into this epic film that is certainly not flawless, but I really want to talk about it because I was enamored by the sheer ferocity of spectacle that transpires in Ridley Scott's epic follow-up to Gladiator from 2000, Gladiator 2. There is about 8 to 10 action set pieces in this movie that are absolutely thrilling to behold. There is a just spectacle of this movie, and it is a spectacle of just mass. There is so much incredible sound in this movie. There's wonderful cinematography display, wonderful craftsmanship in this movie, and a physicality. It is all intersecting in this movie to create a kinetic feeling. And I will fully admit, I was bought into this feeling. It was like the ultimate high for me watching this movie. I felt this movie. There is a ferocity to this movie, and there is an energy that got me locked in and excited and hyped right away. And this movie just starts with a battle. It just starts with an invading force coming in, and we get the beats that feel kind of similar to the first Gladiator film. Essentially, Pedro Pascal walks in. He is the conquering soldier. He ends up taking over the place where Paul Mescal's character is living. And it starts off the events. Obviously, very early on, we find out that Mescal's wife has been slayed by this invading army. And of course, now Mescal is out for revenge against Pedro Pascal's character. And that's the basic premise of this movie. What this may sound familiar to is the first Gladiator film, but that's not actually what this movie is about. Where the first Gladiator film is far more concerned about human desires and existence and what it means to be alive, this film is far more concerned about empires, how they rise and how they fall. Through that exploration, everything feels massive and consequential in this film. Some people are going to think that automatically this makes the story feel far more generic and familiar, because certainly we've seen films that explore the rise and fall of civilization in these circumstances. What I liked about the mode of storytelling that Ridley Scott is doing in this movie is I think this film, Gladiator 2, works well as a companion to the first Gladiator. Essentially, the first Gladiator ends with the character played by Russell Crowe giving his manifesto of political reforms and the emancipation of gladiators. Essentially, this idea of a free Rome. And Gladiator 2 is a movie about how those seeds of discontent grow within a society until they spark a full-blown upending of status quo. It is really thematically how it started versus how it ends. And that's how I viewed this movie. And in those terms, I thought that it was epic of all proportions. And what's funny enough is the ideas of this upending of status quo are actually quite similar to another film that I just reviewed in Wicked, which also comes out this weekend, which if you're interested at all, subscribe to my channel and you can check out all of my reviews, including my Wicked review. But going back and focusing in on Gladiator, there is a spectacle that this movie just achieves. And it works because the world of this film that is now 20 years later and the powers that be have gotten far more outlandish than they were in the first film. And they're far more self-centered And through that, a different energy transpires through this. Because the leaders of this film are so lost and they're so self-absorbed and so out of touch and so extreme, everyone around them becomes more extreme. They become far more vindictive and they're cruel. They are drawn to cruelty because that is what they know will satisfy these emperors' bloodlust. These emperors are played very well. They are very cartoonishly large performances, but they work in the film to kind of show how absurdist power grows in a society that just allows it where it goes unchecked. And when this vacuum is there, it means power is far easier to control. And with power now being up for grabs, it just means you have to be savvy enough to grab the reins. And that gets us to the most important performance in this film, given by the one and only Denzel Washington. He plays Maximus. He is a former slave with plans to control Rome and enlist the new gladiator Lucius, played by Paul Mescal, to help him exact his power. What Ridley Scott understands about directing is he has one of the best actors at his disposal in Gladiator II with Denzel Washington. And when you have one of the best actors living, you might as well make sure they are churning it up and that they are given the most interest in. They are giving the most meaty performance. And that's what Denzel Washington is given. This character is the puppet master, where he gets to be the uber charismatic and ever-present person throughout this narrative. And that means this performance heavily relies on Denzel Washington's charisma, which luckily he has so much to spare. He is uber charismatic in this movie. It is a spectacle to watch him act in this movie. And it's so interesting. I was thinking about it while watching the movie because Denzel is someone who has worked with Ridley Scott in the past with films like American Gangster, but he also worked with Ridley's brother, Tony Scott. They had quite a close relationship working on such films as Man on Fire, Unstoppable. They had Crimson Tide's another one. Like, they had this relationship and partnership, and you can see that Denzel is just so comfortable working with both of these brothers, where I think Tony Scott is able to just capture the charisma and spectacle that is Denzel Washington. Ridley has always been able to capture some of the substance that makes Denzel one of our great actors. One captures the movie star really well. One captures the actor very well. And in this movie, it's a perfect blend of those two ideas. And Washington weaponizes his star power to give an utterly enthralling performance. And adding this agent of chaos just really changes the temperature of this movie, where everything becomes a little bit more urgent as you wait to see what he is going to do next. And that unfamiliarity makes this film feel different than the first Gladiator film. Adding this disruptor gives the familiar tropes new layers and gives familiar character archetypes that we saw in the first film, gives them a little bit more complexity and wiggle room to play. And there are certainly callbacks to the first Gladiator film in Gladiator 2. This film is not without its references, and some people may find it overdone. I actually thought it uses it just the right amount of way. So much of the scenes are almost direct shot-for-shot remakes of the first Gladiator film. If you are well-versed in the first film, you will recognize scenes within this movie. And the first act, I found myself enjoying the movie for what it was, but I did kind of have this feeling of, this is more of the same. Where are we going with this? And luckily, the performance that really started getting me in on this energy, besides the Denzel Washington, was the Pedro Pascal who plays Marcus Acacius. And this character could have easily become another Joaquin Phoenix similar role to which he played in the first Gladiator movie. He is essentially the person who kills, in this film, it's Paul Mescal's wife, and now Mescal is trying to extract his revenge. There is a world in which this performance becomes very similar to the Phoenix performance, and that's not what it is, because Pedro is smartly revealed earlier on in the film to be something else, and thus allowing this film to be more than the ideas of revenge, which really drive the first movie. Rather, we see quickly on is he serves as a cog to an unjust power, and he himself is a victim of this mode of governance. adding this little bit of complexity with the familiarity that we know of this character archetype in the Gladiator world just upends our expectations within this movie. And I think Pedro plays it pretty brilliantly in this movie. He is very well utilized in Gladiator 2. And this movie explores the emotional truth of to rebel is to be free. Power isn't extracted willingly, we learn in the Gladiator films, but must be forcefully taken. The status quo must be upended, and violence is a form in which to enact disruption and forcefully cause changes. That doesn't mean that it's the right thing, that is the wrong thing. It is really just stating like this is a tool to enact change. And in this film, in rebelling, what we do in life echoes in eternity. Like that is a very important thematic idea that Russell Crowe's character says in the first Gladiator film. What we do in life echoes in eternity. That is what this movie is about. The spirit of the true Gladiator films is rebellion. And in the first film, it's really one person rebelling. And in the second film, it is an empire rebelling against the powers that be. And how just one person's actions can upend a way of being and spark a rebellion and topple empires. And in the case of Gladiator 2, it's not one man, but a lineage of men and women who have been working to undercut and rebel in their own ways. And eventually the catalyst arrives to topple the systems that be, with the chaos factor that is the Denzel Washington performance mixed into it. It just adds an exciting dynamic layer to this film that I felt really builds off what the first movie is speaking about and upend some of our expectations while still staying true to what the first movie does so well in its humanity. And let's talk about maybe the big performance of this movie, which I haven't mentioned yet. It is Paul Mescal. In Gladiator 2, this catalyst that I just referred to, that is the character of Lucius, the former heir to the Roman Empire and son of Maximus Decimus Meridius, played by Russell Crowe in the first movie. I had some low expectations for Mescal going in. One, I haven't been necessarily the biggest fan of him thus far as an actor, and I kept hearing from people that he was miscast in this role. So I was a little worried going into this movie for the Mescal factor. And I'm intrigued by this because when I kept hearing this idea that he had been miscast, I noticed no one was really giving details to why he was miscast. And it felt very monoculture to me, where one person said it early on, and then a lot of people started parroting it, and you start seeing it all over social media, and people just kind of kept using it within their vocabulary or language when talking about this film. I really was struggling to find people define it. Now, obviously, there are some wonderful critics who are able to express themselves. Others, I just kind of feel like are parroting what they hear some of these critics saying. To his credit, I want to shout out somebody that I've always liked and respected and have read. Jeff Sneider said in his newsletter for his review of Gladiator 2, he said, "It's not his fault that he seems more at home reciting poetry than putting on a good show for the people of Rome." I disagree with Jeff, but at least he was able to contextualize what people were feeling, I think, with the Mescal character, which was he might have not been able to get the masculinity required for the gladiator role, and then he seems a bit too sensitive. I actually like this sensitive side that Mescal is able to bring into Gladiator 2, and it really worked well for me. I actually appreciate Jeff saying it as he sees it fit, and while I disagree with his conclusion of why the Mescal performance doesn't work or why he believes it's miscast, I actually thought he was quite great in this film, and he is able to have some of those softer moments while being a great physical presence in this movie. I understand where he's coming from, but in the age of social media, one person saying something, we all hear it, and then we go into the film with that bias and tell other people, oh, he's miscast. And it's why I ignore so much of these early reviews, why I try not to read any of the reviews before going into a movie. That way I can form my own honest and non-compromised review as best as I can for you guys. I really want to give you guys the best, most honest reviews that I can, that are not filtered, that are not parroting other people. I want this to be as authentic of a review as I can. For what it's worth, like I said, I liked the Lucius performance given by Mescal. I appreciated what he was doing. Ultimately, there are a few scenes of him where I could understand the allegations of miscasting, simply because there are a few scenes where I think he is essentially asked to give a Braveheart level speech, and the speech is just underwritten. I don't think he delivers it necessarily bad. It was just that some of these speeches are supposed to be the act of rebelling, like the big, like, you all join me, like we are all fighting for this right now. And I didn't fully buy into those scenes. I wish these monologues had been actually, in the case I find they're underwritten, I actually think it would have been helpful for this scene to be a little bit more overwritten. With that said, I think Mescal is really good in this film. And to be honest, I'm struggling to find a ton of flaws with this movie. Yeah, this film can feel a little long. I definitely felt it in the first act. Some of the CGI, I guess, at times can be spotty. To be honest, I really didn't notice it. I didn't think about it. I have been hearing some people complain about the historical accuracy of Gladiator 2. And if you're complaining about it, I guess that's fair enough. I just don't view this movie as needing to be historical accurate. And with that lens, I had far more fun with it. Yeah, if you're concerned about the, oh, well, this couldn't have happened, or, oh, there weren't sharks in there, like, oh, or someone can't ride a rhino, like, cool, good for you. Like, that's no fun. Like, I had fun. I like that there's a guy riding a rhino. I like that there's sharks swimming around and eating gladiators as they fall into the water. Like, that's just cool. I like that. So with that, yeah, Ridley Scott made an absolutely ferocious movie that I just responded to. And it's one of my favorite films of the year. No apologies. 4.5 out of 5 stars for Gladiator 2. And I hope you guys check this one out. And I hope you guys check out some of my other reviews. I just posted my Wicked review yesterday, and I have other reviews coming out later this week. So make sure to subscribe down to my channel below for more. Thank you all for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.